Well, on this Sunday, we are tracking this second day of protests happening right now in Parliament Hill. Canadians from across the country protesting vaccine mandates, rules, and regulations. Now, to that, we've just heard from the Ottawa Police, and they tell us that several criminal investigations are now underway. This is in relation to the desecration of the National War Memorial and the Terry Fox statue. They say they have reports of threatening, illegal, and intimidating behavior to police and city workers and other individuals. They say illegal behavior will not be tolerated and will be fully investigated. They are also asking people in Ottawa who have concerns or can report an incident to do so in person. They say they cannot rely on social media to move forward with any investigation. Well, as we track what is happening in the nation's capital today, we're also now reaching out to Timothy Caulfield. He's the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy and professor with the Faculty of Law and School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. So, Tim, thank you for joining us today. Always good to speak with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Listen, I want to get your take here on what we've witnessed so far. What began as a trucker protest against cross-border vaccine mandates morphing into something much larger. What do you see happening here?
Well, first of all, I think it is a representation of the frustration that we're seeing out there. Look, everyone is frustrated with where we are right now with the pandemic, and obviously that's playing a role. Secondly, it really highlights the degree to which this has become about ideology, and sometimes far-right ideology. And I think there's a pretty robust body of evidence to support that. The other thing I think we're seeing right now, people exploiting those two elements. So exploiting the frustration that, we all understandably have, and the ideology in order to push particular agendas. And I think some of those agendas, unfortunately, are pretty hardcore, pretty extreme. And lastly, if I may, I also think for me, because this is an area that I study, it highlights, unfortunately, the power of misinformation, because so much, of what we hear coming from these protesters from, a scientific perspective just isn't true. And that, I find that incredibly frustrating. Okay, let's break that up. And I'll begin with what you say here. People exploiting the situation. What people are you referring to? In what way are they exploiting this moment? Well, you're seeing it really kind of across a continuum. You're seeing legitimate members of political parties here in Canada, and I understand that there, is broad, a breadth of perspectives on this from our own political leaders, and that's good. We should have open debates about, when we should use mandates and what does the science say about mandates. So you are seeing, certain sectors of our own, political establishment using this moment for as a political opportunity, and I get that. I don't necessarily think it's great, but I understand it. But at the same time, we've heard about pretty extreme elements too at these protests, not just in Ottawa, but across Canada, right? And people using this sort of moment, to put forward their far-right ideological perspectives, and I worry that that's going to gain momentum.
Okay, and to that, we have seen swastikas, upside-down Canadian flags, known white supremacists involved in the organization of what's happening right now. But, there are also, and I would probably argue here that the most people who are here don't identify with those radical elements. They say they're actually just there because they're against mandates and restrictions. Is that a voice being heard right now?
I think that's a really good point, and that's of course one of my concerns is that the rhetoric emanating from the anti-vax community and from these hardcore elements is having an outsized impact on public discourse. That's one of my great fears, actually. But we should take a beat here and remember that most Canadians, by far, support vaccines. Most recent studies have told us that most individuals also support mandates. And there's been some recent research that has shown that even pretty extreme mandates, right? So I think we also need to recognize that. I think I'm a little worried about false balance, giving sort of too much weight to this kind of protest. There's a very interesting study that came out just last week. My colleague Frank Graves, one of the individuals who coordinated this from Ecos Research, found that there is almost a perfect correlation between believing misinformation misinformation, sort of embracing misinformation and being against these public health measures. And I get it. It's a very chaotic information environment out there, but I think that highlights how challenging our communication challenge really is.
Well, let's pick up there, because you mentioned the communication challenge. You worry about misinformation. Talk about this protest. Does it signal a glaring problem in how officials have been communicating around this pandemic?
You know, I think it does. You know, I think that there is, again, good news, right, in the fact that, you know, we went from a situation where we had, almost 50% hesitancy in Canada, or a degree of hesitancy, to a situation now where, you know, those who are hardcore deniers or are hesitant now are pretty small, depending on what jurisdiction you are in Canada, somewhere around 10 to 15%. So that's a good news story. But, you know, I still think we need to learn from the pandemic how we talked about mandates. You know, were we too dogmatic early days? Did we not do enough to explain the scientific uncertainty and bring Canadians on for that sort of scientific ride, so to speak, and let them know that there is a degree of uncertainty and that our response is always going to be shifting? And was that uncertainty kind of weaponized by the extreme elements that we're seeing in this convoy?
I want to pick up a bit on where you're talking about false equivalencies, because when you look at the number of Canadians fully vaccinated right now, 82.3% ages 5 and up fully vaccinated. And from what we're hearing from truckers, 90% are fully vaccinated right now. So that goes a bit to what you were saying earlier. But, you know, as you look back as what may have been imperfect and how that might be improved on in future, let's talk about the now. What is a responsible path forward at this point? At the very least, this weekend shows there is a sizable minority that are tired and angry about how this country has handled the pandemic. So what needs to be done, and by whom, to address a path forward?
Yeah, look, I don't think we should let these protests derail a rational discussion about the value of mandates, about other public health measures. You know, as we hopefully segue out of the worst parts of the pandemic, we are going to have these conversations, right? And I do think we need to understand and listen to those who are frustrated, and engage them in a meaningful way. But I don't think we should let these extreme elements that are sort of twisting the science and misrepresenting where we are have an outsized role in how Canadians talk about this really challenging topic.
Timothy Caulfield, thank you for this.
Appreciate the opportunity.